Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this short session for 30 minutes. Tim Baker's my name, and I'm going to talk to you today about cultivating a culture of conversation. And it might seem like a fairly straightforward topic, but I think the truth is, from my own observations and I guess from the research that I've looked at, is that a lot of managers have a lot of trouble with having these regular conversations, and I'm talking about performance and development conversations. I'm not talking, of course, about project-based conversations or task conversations. And we do know also that the evidence is that when people do have these regular catch-ups, if we call it that, they get great results. It improves productivity, it improves trust, it improves engagement. And really, it's a great investment of time. But of course, a lot of managers, being very busy, often don't do that. And the other issue often is, what do I talk about in these sessions? And so what I want to do is address that for you today. So I'll just share my screen again, and then we'll talk about that in a bit more detail. So those of you who aren't aware of who I am an author, I am a keynote speaker, I run workshops and play rugby still in the Golden Oldies competition here in Brizzy. And so a little bit about me there. And I think one of the big objections that we have around this whole topic, as I've just alluded to now, is that we're so busy at work, we just don't seem to have enough time to have these regular conversations that we're talking about. But if I can convince you that these conversations actually are an investment and make a huge difference, albeit they're not necessarily tangible, then it might be an opportunity for you to do that in your own organization. So I want to talk specifically about the 5 conversations framework, which is a framework that I designed from one of my books called The End of the Job Description. In fact, I wanted the 5 conversations framework to be a replacement for the performance review. And I'm pleased to say there are many organizations around the world that are using the 5 conversations framework, either as a replacement for the performance review or as an enabler to improve the quality of the performance review. I want to talk a little bit about why it's effective, and I want to show you some actual data that will convince you of why it's effective. And then I'll talk about how you can implement it. And if you want further information, of course, you can contact me for further detail. We do know that surveys suggest that 70% of people are disengaged at work. And we also know that of those 70%, it's probably likely that about 25% of those 70 are what we might call actively disengaged. So they're actually trying to undermine the organization. Now, that's a pretty serious problem, because if you could reduce disengagement, say to even 50%, imagine the difference that that would make. So the question really is, how do you engage people more so than they perhaps are at the moment? And I don't think it's all about giving people free massages or those sorts of things. I think there is a human element to this, and it's about their level of rapport and engagement with their team leader. And, you know, I define engagement as a commitment to work and to actively contribute to organizational performance. Now, you and I both know what engagement looks like. I mean, if I came to your workplace today and we sat down together for 20 minutes, assuming people were working in an office, I could probably work out pretty quickly who was disengaged and who was engaged. And I believe that you and I would agree on that. So it's not like some mystery. We understand what it means. We also now know from research that the higher the level of engagement, the higher the revenue. So we now know that engagement has a direct link to organizational performance. So obviously it's in our interest to have engaged employees, not just because it might make us feel warm and fuzzy, but it's also because it contributes to the bottom line. So we do have research around that now. Now, what I want to do now is just share with you the 5 conversations framework if you haven't been exposed to it previously. Now, let me spend a bit of time going through this with you. You'll notice that on the left-hand side, there are 5 months. So the argument is that you have a regular conversation or a conversation once every month. Now, you might say, is monthly the best? I mean, I would say monthly, every 3 weeks or fortnightly, but just for the purposes of the exercise, once a month works well for this framework. And then the middle column there you can see is the nature of the conversation. So what it means is that each conversation is thematic. So basically in month 1, you sit down and have a climate review conversation. Now that's got, of course, nothing to do with the weather, but ultimately it's about people's job satisfaction, morale, and communication, as you can see on the right-hand side. And in fact, I start that conversation and suggest to my clients to start that conversation with this question. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10's high, 1's low, how would you rate your current job satisfaction? Now, it might seem like a strange sort of question, but if you ask people, how's your job satisfaction going, you're probably going to get a very funny sort of ambiguous answer. But if you ask people to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, you're in a position there where they have to think about it. So let's say someone says 6. All right, so the next question I'm going to ask them is, do you think it's possible? Oh, first of all, why is it a 6? So you get them to explain why it's a 6. And as we know with these things, job satisfaction ebbs and flows, doesn't it? So one day it's high, the next day it's low, and it changes, and that's fair enough. But so we're basically getting a snapshot of where people are at. And then my next question will be to them, do you think it's possible for it to go from a 6 to a 7? Now, that might seem like a strange question, but for some people, a 6 out of 10 is as good as it gets. So the whole idea is to just determine whether or not 6 is as good as it gets. And then the next question is, what do I need to do as your leader to help you get it from a 6 to a 7? Now, there may be nothing, there may be something, who knows? But you can see it opens up a rich avenue of conversation early on. And that does give you a very good sense of where people are at and what they value in the workplace. So that's why we start with a climate review conversation. And of course, you can record all this information if you choose to as well and come back to it in the second round. So I actually suggest to people that you should have 2 rounds of the 5 conversations every year. So ultimately, you have your 5 conversations. You might have a month break where you're absolutely at optimum peak performance in your organization. And then you do another round. So you actually end up having 2 conversations on each of these topics every year. Now, you might be thinking, goodness me, I don't have time to do that. But remember, these conversations are designed to be about 20 minutes long. You can have a very productive conversation in 20 minutes, and you can have a very unproductive conversation in an hour. So it's not so much the time that's spent, it's the quality of the questions and the engagement in the conversation. And what the 5 conversations does, of course, is help you to determine, to make that a very focused conversation. In month 2, we talk about strengths and talents. Now, why would we go there? Well, instead of going straight for the jugular, that is what people aren't good at, let's start with what people are actually good at. This is based on positive psychology. So again, my first question there is, what is the one thing that you enjoy most about the work you do? Now, we know from research there's a high correlation between what people enjoy and what they're good at. Because think about it this way, if you said to someone, what's your strength? They might sit there and demur for a while, but if you ask them, what's the thing that you enjoy most about your work? It's fairly easy to give an answer. So I've actually identified probably their strength. Then it's a question, and the rest of the conversation is to think about how we can best utilize that strength in the work that they currently do, or perhaps in the future might do. So that's a very productive and positive conversation early on. In month 3, we talk about opportunities for growth. And again, I'm expecting that the person will come to my conversation, and I'm expecting that they will put on the table an opportunity for growth. So it's not for me to tell them what I think they should be working on, although I've probably got a very good idea about what that might be. But I want them to take complete ownership of that and to come to that conversation actually identifying what it is. Then once I've got through 3 conversations, conversation 4 is a learning and development conversation, which ultimately is about really pulling together the threads of the past 2 conversations. So the strengths we've talked about, the opportunities for growth we've talked about. So we're now in a position to be able to put together some sort of a plan. It doesn't have to be a very formal plan, but some sort of a learning plan. And of course, this is not necessarily about sending people away to courses. It could really be about mentoring people. It could be about showing people how to do something. It could be buddying people up with others. And so it's very much a practical conversation about how we can build on your strengths and perhaps minimize your opportunities for growth, or to help you work on those areas. Now, whereas conversation 4, learning and development, is very much about the individual, conversation 5 is very much about the organization. So again, I expect people to come to that meeting with some ideas and thoughts about how to make the organization more efficient and effective. Now, if I have 10 conversations with people, it's likely there'll probably be only one, suggestion that's really viable. That's okay. And then I implement it. And so I've got a continuous improvement process happening as well in my organization. So it's highly effective. It works extremely well. And, I have a list of questions. And of course, if you want to talk to me about this after, I'm more than happy to talk to you a bit more about this. There is a process of implementation. And there's a number of support tools around here that will assist. And let me just give you a sense of that very quickly, because we've only got a short amount of time together. But up front, the first thing that I do is I collect some data about where people are at right now, which is just a simple online survey that we organize from my office. And in that, we're just trying to get a benchline of where people are up to in terms of engagement and morale and a whole bunch of indicators. What it means, of course, is that once we've implemented the 5 conversations, I can get some data, some qualitative and quantitative data, which demonstrates whether or not the 5 conversations has been effective or not. Once I've done that, I need to induct people. And what that means is that we spend a couple of hours, and if it's done, online, it can be done online. But I need to explain to people what the benefits of this are and how they will prosper from the 5 conversations. And so a couple of hours with the managers is extremely important. And I think also the people on the receiving end would benefit from the induction as well. That ensures that things are off to a good start. And of course, you only get one chance at applying these things. And if you do it in a bit of a haphazard way, it's likely to die a natural death. The third intervention is that during the cycle of the 5 conversations, I have in the past organized small group coaching sessions with 3 or 4 individuals where they're sharing their successes having these conversations. And what I find is it's a very powerful way of learning, because people are sitting there listening to their colleagues, the challenges that they've got, the wins that they've got, and they often go away and apply what they've learned. So that's a great support mechanism. The other thing that I do as a service, I'm not suggesting you need to do all these things, I'm just giving you a sense of how it might work. I do a 30-minute webinar each month to basically bookend the 5 conversations and give people a chance to understand what the next conversation is all about, what the questions are, what you can expect to get out of it, and how you can prepare. So that's done, and that's and it also means that the people who are dragging the chain need to get their previous conversation done before the end of the month, because it's a monthly cycle, remember. The next step is, of course, to implement it. And that's the real learning. A lot of people say, oh, I need to go to a training course on having conversations. But in my view, actually doing the 5 conversations is the learning. And I think people learn a lot by just actually getting in and having a go. And it does build leadership skills and capabilities just by engaging in these 5 conversations. I do have a recording system, online recording system, that can record the comments that are made in preparation and after as well. And it's also a great system. It's a web-based system that allows people to click a button and it reminds the manager that we're ready for the next conversation, and a whole lot of things like that. So they're some of the ways that Winners at Work can support you in your organization if you choose to go down this road. Of course, you can just go down this road anyway, but I do know from my own experience that if you don't have a good support system behind you, it's likely that the 5 conversations framework will be considered a great idea at the beginning, and then people kind of get involved in busyness and forget about what they're doing. So that gives you a sense of how it works and what should happen as a result. So I guess it raises the question, what evidence have I got that can demonstrate to you that this actually works? Well, I have got that evidence. The client will remain nameless, but I'm going to show you some very interesting feedback. Now, all I'll say about this is I was working in a large IT business. In fact, it was a government agency here in Brisbane, and the morale was rock bottom, and they wanted to implement the 5 conversations. So remember what I said earlier, we surveyed everybody at the beginning, and then after 5 conversations, what we did is we surveyed everybody on the same questions at the end. And this was only 5 conversations. But what you'll find is it had an amazing impact. Look at this, for example. The communication between management and staff is reasonably good most of the time, was the statement that was given. Now, at the beginning of the 5 conversations, only 50% of people could actually agree with that statement. Having gone through 5 conversations using the model I did, it went up to 77%. My boss has talked to me about ways to improve my job satisfaction. Well, look at this. It went up from 23% to 44%. Now, this is only 5 20-minute conversations. Can you imagine the difference this would make if it was done on a regular basis? Here's another example. The question was asked at the beginning, my boss has discussed my strengths and talents with me. Only 43% could confidently say yes to that. And at the end of it, 72% said they could. Now, granted, one of the conversations, of course, was the strengths and talents conversation, but nevertheless, that's a dramatic improvement over 5 months. Here's another example. My boss has given me feedback on my strengths and talents. All right, we went from 43% up to 61%. So you can again see that there's significant improvements in terms, and I should say to you that there were over 500 people involved in this survey. Here's another example. My boss is very aware of my strengths and talents. Well, it's gone up 20%, and that is a good result. Here's another example. I have not received enough feedback on my work from my boss. 36% said no, I haven't received enough feedback from my boss about the work that I do. But after the 5 conversations with this large government department, it doubled in a matter of 5 conversations. Because you can imagine if you're sitting down with people and you're having these 5 conversations that you've never had before, it's very likely that you're going to be given opportunities to give feedback that you perhaps would not have done otherwise. So you can see that it's improved significantly. Here's another example. I feel my boss is getting the best out of me in my current job. Now, this is a significant improvement. Only 43% of people could actually confidently say that my manager is getting the best from me in the role that I have. So that's gone from 43% to 72%. And that's just 5 20-minute conversations. So as I said, it's really exciting if you think about it from the perspective of what it can do for your organization across the board. Another example, I've discussed strategies to develop, sorry, I can't quite see that. I've got my camera in the way, to grow and develop my current role with my boss. 40 to 55. That's a significant improvement. So I guess what I'm demonstrating to you that it's not just a case of sitting down and developing a rapport with people. Obviously, all of these percentages result in greater energy, greater engagement, higher levels of trust, better communication, and clearly all of those things are going to contribute to the bottom line without a doubt. My boss has discussed my learning and development needs with me. Okay, 47% to 78%, which is a great result. The second one, I've discussed my learning and development needs more than once in the last 12 months. Well, that's gone up 20% over the course of the 5 conversations. And bear in mind, as I said earlier, this is only 5 conversations. So it's not as if, people have gone through a whole year of developmental conversations. This is just 5 conversations, very targeted at what is needed. Another one, the learning I'm doing is designed to build on my strengths and opportunities for growth. Well, a significant improvement again, 47 to 72. And these are aggregate results. I'm not suggesting that everybody improved to the same degree, but overall you can see that obviously these are good results, and they are significant results that demonstrate that this is working extremely well. My boss has implemented some improvements from his or her team to improve my team's way of doing business. Now, remember, the last conversation is the innovation and continuous improvement conversation. Well, it's gone from 43 to 78. So it's been a significant improvement. And as a result of that, obviously, there's evidence that some of the ideas that people have raised in that 5th conversation have actually been implemented, which is fantastic. My boss is open to improvements that I suggest. Okay, 57% said that they were open. Now, after 5 conversations, it's gone to 83%. So obviously the boss has been a little bit more receptive and has demonstrated that. And one of the reasons for that, of course, is because we have bothered to have that conversation. Because bear in mind, it's probably unlikely that this would not have been a normal conversation that a team member would have had with their team members. But now, of course, being part of the framework means that they need to have that conversation. And during that conversation, it's quite possible the managers were very receptive to the ideas that were raised in that conversation. That's the quantitative data. What about the qualitative data? Well, I'll just give you a quick look at this. Here are some of the comments that have been made from the survey. And this, remember, was the final survey. Questions were not intrusive and could be delivered in a friendly manner. They provided an opportunity to learn more about individual team members. The conversations helped to break down barriers in communication and enabled line managers to have more open conversations with team members. The 5 conversations has fostered more impromptu conversations in the team. For example, discussions about the team members, what the team members are working on. And then a final comment there, overall, the 5 conversations framework assisted in improving engagement, trust, and relationships for participants. Just a few more comments and then we'll move on. Involvement of a neutral party, me, helped to overcome team members' suspicions about the 5 conversations framework. The initial briefing assisted in gaining buy-in by explaining the purpose of the 5 conversations and the rationale for each conversation. Webinars were useful in expanding on the questions and providing direction on what to think about. And group coaching helped line managers to understand where other teams were at and to share strategies to overcome challenges. So you can see clearly that some of the interventions that I went through earlier are obviously been appreciated and helped to make this a success. And I can say to you that this organisation has now taken this on basically full time. And what that means is that they're having 2 rounds of the 5 conversations every year, and we're assessing and monitoring that. And of course, the results now are sustainable. The results that I showed you earlier are now in a sustainable state for the simple reason that people are doing it as part of their normal duties and responsibilities as team leaders. So it's obviously been very, very successful. So I think what I might do is just finish up by just giving you a sense of how this has worked. The advantages of implementing the 5 conversations versus the disadvantages of not implementing it. Well, one of the advantages was heightened levels of engagement. Of course, if you don't do the 5 conversations, it means that disengagement levels will remain the same, probably as high as 70%. The advantages is it builds more trust, particularly between the team member and his or her team. The disadvantages of not doing it, of course, means that there's going to be a them and us culture. And this was very prevalent in the case study I've just discussed. The advantages is that there's open communication and more open communication, and you could see that from the data. The disadvantages, of course, is you'll get told on a need-to-know basis it'll be closed communication. The advantages are there's a greater attraction and retention of team members, and that in itself is, of course, a competitive advantage. The disadvantages, of course, are you will have high turnover where people are disenchanted and decide to take their bat and ball and go and work somewhere else. Those, of course, that have the luxury to do that. The advantages of implementing the 5 conversations is that it actually improves leadership and engagement. And by getting leaders to apply these 5 conversations, they're doing what perhaps you and I know they probably should be doing. The disadvantage, of course, is that you end up maintaining a command and control leadership model, which isn't, of course, ideal in the modern world we're living in. So you can see that there's some major advantages of using a structured approach like the 5 conversations framework. And of course, it does create a culture of conversation, which is ultimately what this is all about. Greater productivity, things stay the same. So another advantage over not doing it. So just to finish up, I wanted to offer you an opportunity to talk to me, and I'm offering you a 30-minute free consultation. No obligation. I'm not going to be chasing you up or anything, but if you'd like to have a conversation with me for 30 minutes, basically by Zoom or telephone, whatever you choose, regardless of which country you're in or where you are, we can do that, of course, as you know, online. And we can talk about how the 5 conversations can be implemented in your workplace. So I'm happy to basically take this to the next level, but I certainly won't go running around chasing you. All you've got to do is send me an email. And of course, I'll be sending you a copy of the slides and recording today, or give me a phone call, and I'm happy to organize that for you. And next week, and you're probably aware, some of you who attend these weekly, I have another webinar, and I'm going to look next week at giving feedback remotely, which is always challenging because you're obviously not sitting in the room doing that. That comes from my book, Mastering Feedback, which is out in a couple of months. And you've got all the details there and the link. And of course, I'll be sending you a copy of these slides and recording, and you can just click on that link and you can then register for the next webinar. So folks, that's it from me. I'll just stop sharing. Thank you very much. I hope you found that useful and thought-provoking. And if you want to take an opportunity to talk to me further about your own organisation, as I said, I'm more than happy to do that. Wish you all the best. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for your support, for turning up on the Friday for these sessions. And I look forward to seeing you next week. So thanks everyone. All the best and goodbye.